What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So obviously the talk of the NHL world right now is the Edmonton Oilers. They're 2-9-1, absolutely ass right now. Lost to the San Jose Sharks 3-2, the worst team in the entire league. Well, actually not like the Oilers are the worst team in the entire league, but it really just embodies the Oilers as a whole throughout the McDavid era. It has been a massive letdown. It is 9th year in the league. They have still not even made a Stanley Cup final. So I wanted to go down memory lane and give you the top 10 worst moments of the entire McDavid era. So basically, whenever the draft was in 2015, from then on, what are the 10 worst moves that have happened? But trust me, there's a lot of them. So I wanted to go through them right now and relive. If you're an Edmonton Oilers fan, you probably don't even want to be watching this. It's going to trigger your PTSD. But without further ado, let's dive into it. At number 10, I got the Adam Larson for Taylor Hall trade. Some people might want this higher. I understand because Taylor Hall won that Hart Trophy, it does on the surface look much worse than when you really dive into it. Because when you really dive into it, not that the Edmonton Oilers didn't need Taylor Hall, but they were set in terms of their forward core future. They had a young RNH, a young McDavid, a young Draisaitl going into that summer of 2016, but they were lacking a shutdown defenseman like an Adam Larson, and they definitely expected Adam Larson to maybe be better, but he was a solid top pairing defensive defenseman for 5 years in Edmonton. He kind of held his end of the bargain. Hall definitely exploded, but even Hall was only on New Jersey for 3.5 years, and after that Hart year, he rapidly fell off. It was just that one insane year peak. So when looking at Adam Larson, like, again, doesn't offer that much offensively, but Edmonton didn't need offense that much. So that's the only reason I don't have it higher. Obviously, the Edmonton Oilers lost that trade. I'm not trying to justify it entirely, but I think some people are going to want that higher, so I kind of wanted to explain it. Moving on to number 9. At number 9, we got the Duncan Keith trade. The Oilers didn't give up a lot to get Duncan Keith. They only gave up Caleb Jones, brother of Seth Jones, in a 3rd-round pick. But Duncan Keith came in. He had 2 years left at $5.5 million. He only played 1 year before basically being forced to retire by the Edmonton Oilers. He had 21 points in 64 games. It was just another disaster. The writing was on the wall. After like 2017, Duncan Keith rapidly started to regress. By 2021, he was like a 3rd pair defenseman, if that. The fact that Ken Holland was willing to swallow that contract, 2 years left at 5.5, obviously a disaster. I'm not saying if they didn't do this trade, they probably still would have lost to Colorado in the 2022 playoffs, but they basically burned $5.5 million in terms of cap that year. It was a horrible deal. Just unacceptable. Just relying on the past on a guy like Duncan Keith, not realizing the caliber of player that he was when they traded for him. Just the disaster of a trade. Next up, I got the Ryan Strome deal, but not the Jordan Eberle for Ryan Strome deal. I got the Ryan Strome for Ryan Spooner deal. This happened in 2019. Ryan Strome, first year in Edmonton, wasn't that good. He had 34 points in 81 games. Then he really got off to a slow start with 2 points in 18 games. So they decided to make a trade with the New York Rangers, get Ryan Spooner, who's horrible for them. Ryan Spooner ended up having like 4 points in 25 games for the Oilers and then getting traded again. And Ryan Strome went on to have a very good career with the New York Rangers. He went on to have 195 points in 263 games, which averages to about 61-point pace per year. And yes, that was in part because he played with Artemi Panarin. But the Edmonton Oilers, because Ryan Spooner has not played in the NHL literally since 2019, since that's trade, the season that this trade happened, they basically gave away Ryan Strome for nothing, a guy that in his late 20s, he had decent years. He had very good years, including a 49-point and 56 game season during the 2021 shortened COVID year. So when looking at this, Peter Chiarelli just basically gave away Ryan Strome, who instead of giving him more time to potentially really gain that chemistry in Edmonton, he shipped him off, got basically nothing in return. Ryan Spooner still had a $3.1 million cap hit, same as Ryan Strome. They just basically gave away a solid middle 6 forward, 2nd-line center for nothing. Very bad deal. Next up, I got the Darnell Nurse extension. This is kind of a weird one because I was going back with an Oilers fan, Kyler Mimamito, if you know who that is. They kind of messed up with Nurse in terms of giving him a bridge deal when they gave him a 2-year, $3.5 million bridge deal. If they decided to go long-term there, it probably would have only cost them like $6.5 million, but they bridged him. He did have a very good year, but they decided to give him that insane 9.25 8-year deal. And it is obviously, he has not lived up to it. Right now, he has 47 points in 94 games under that current contract, and obviously he's not that good defensively. I always say with Darnell Nurse, he's a very good second pair guy. would be a decent number 2 on a lot of teams, but at 9.25, that is obviously massively restricted the Edmonton Oilers cap situation, where they have to dump a Kyler Yamamoto, while they have to do a bunch of like very cheap moves, bring in a Connor Brown on a bonus laden deal because they don't have cap space because Darnell Nurse is taking up so much, and it has obviously led to them having this cap crunch. Moving on to number 6, the drafting and, more importantly, the development of Jesse Puljujarvi. Jesse Puljujarvi obviously went 4th overall. I'm not going to shit on them for taking Puljujarvi because he was kind of the consensus 3rd best prospect in that draft. I don't know if some of you guys even remember the 2016 draft, but it went Matthews, Laine, Puljujarvi, pretty easily 3rd overall. People were shocked when PLD went 3rd overall. Like, they're like, that is blasphemy. Puljujarvi so much better. PLD, who isn't even that good of a player in my opinion, he's like a good second-line center. Obviously much better than Puljujarvi now, but he was the clear pick at 3rd overall. But they really messed up his development. They immediately brought him over to North America, where he played in the AHL, NHL, and they didn't play him at all. He played 11 minutes his first year, barely. He put up like 20-point pace. Then he played 13. Then he played 11. Then in that 2018-2019 season, they shipped him back to Finland. Like, so you think about that. He should have just stayed in Finland for a year or two, played against the Finnish grown men instead of NHL level talent, let him develop. Then maybe in 2018, 2019, you bring him over. They reversed it almost, absolutely killed his confidence. He played good in Finland, but at that point, he just wasn't that good of an NHLer. Yes, he came over. He always put up good advanced stats, but he couldn't finish for shit. He was playing with McDavid, playing with Draisaitl. It just never panned out, in part because their development plan was just completely half-assed and completely rushed. And maybe there was some mistakes on that evaluation. Again, I would have taken him 4th overall. All of us probably would have taken him 4th overall. But it ended up being a pretty big disaster because back in 2016, when they drafted Puljujarvi, Draisaitl was coming off a very good second year. McDavid, great rookie year. They were expected that big 3 was going to be one of the best big 3 forwards in the entire league. Puljujarvi didn't pan out. That obviously hurt them a lot. Next up, Zack Kassian getting a 4-year, $3.25 million contract. So Zack Kassian, career kind of bottom 6 grinder, ends up on the Oilers the 2019-2020 season. He puts up 34 points in 59 games because he plays 442 minutes on the top line with McDavid and Draisaitl, which 34 points in 59 games, or 34 points in 59 games is not that impressive considering that was when Draisaitl won the Hart. McDavid was like the same points per game. So he did that. Chiarelli decided to give him a 4-year, $3.25 million contract. Then immediately that following year, Yamamoto debuts. He starts playing on the top line. Puljujarvi starts playing a lot in that top 6. Kassian ends up going down, and as a result, he has 5 points in 24 games that following year. The following year after that, he has 19 and 58, which is a slight improvement, but for 3.25, it's disaster. And they have to end up trading him to the Coyotes. He moved back from 29th overall to 32nd overall, and then give up a 2nd and a 3rd round pick on top of that. So yeah, it was just a horrible signing, and then they had to give up assets that they should be using at the deadlines to go all in, to go contend for the cup. They're just making up for mistakes of the past. It was Holland making up for a Chiarelli mistake. Just another disaster. Number 4, I got the Philip Broberg pick. This compared to Puljujarvi was the right pick, bad development. This was bad pick in the moment, kind of bad development as well. He is only 22 right now, but when looking at Puljujarvi, the options around him, Zegras went immediately after at 9th overall. Broberg went at 8th overall. But looking at it, Zegras was at 10th overall. Boldy was at 12th. Spencer Knight was at 13th. Cam York was at 14th. Caulfield was at 15th. Basically, they just completely missed on this pick. In the moment, it was kind of a head scratcher. They went defense, especially after going Bouchard last year in defense. I think they kind of prioritized defense in this draft instead of best player available, which I personally hate. I think you should always go for best player available, especially when it's not like the 1st overall pick. But when looking at it, yeah, you just don't draft. Draft based on best available, because it could end up being like Broberg, where they don't even become an NHLer. At this point, I'm not sure he's ever going to be anything besides an okay 3rd pairing. He's 22. He's not even cracking the lineup most nights. So when looking at that, Broberg was an utter disaster. Moving on to number 3, we're in the top 3. Milan Lucic signing a 7-year, $6 million per deal. The Oilers wanted that tough physical presence on that top line with McDavid, so obviously they went after Lucic, who had a lot of success in Boston, in LA. It made sense at the time. He was 28 years old, so there was definitely some current concerns about 7 years, but he was okay in his first year. He had 23 goals, 27 assists for 50 points. Not great for $6 million, but considering the leadership and the physicality that he brings, it was kind of worth it. But the following year, 34 points in 82 games, then 20 points in 79 games in that third year, 4 more years remaining on that. You got to get rid of him. They end up trading him from James Neal, who was somehow even worse than Lucic. End up having to buy out James Neal in, I believe, 2021. It was just a disaster. Basically burnt $6 million for one half decent year and then having to take on an even worse contract. Absolutely horrible. Do not give old grinders in their late 20s long-term deals. They did that with Lucic. Then they would go on to do it with Kassian again. Just another disaster. At number 2, Zack Campbell. Zack Campbell, 5 years, $5 million. In the moment, I got to be honest, I thought it was a pretty decent deal. Most people did. I thought he could at least be a serviceable starter. He's been another disaster. He has an 886 with a 3.53 in his stint with the Oilers. Obviously got sent down in his first AHL game. He allows 4 goals. And he's probably I feel bad for him at this point. He's probably so messed up mentally just from all the pressure, and I'm not sure he's ever going to return to even being a somewhat capable NHL starter. Definitely, maybe he could become a decent backup, but at $5 million, 4 years, he's 31 years old. It's brutal. Their goaltending, that is the number one thing that 2 off seasons ago that Ken Holland had to address with Mike Smith, Koskinen leaving. He tried to address it with this move. It ended up blowing up in their face. Basically cost them last season. Looks like it's going to cost them this year. I think this is the worst signing of the McDavid era. I like Lucic. It's a forward. You can bury him. You can get some value out of him in the bottom 6. A starting goalie, if they suck, they're basically negative money. Like if they're so much below average, they're literally, you putting out there is honestly like, he's been worth like negative $2 to $3 million every single year that he's played with the Oilers. So it's another disaster. But at number 1, I think this one is number 1. I'm not gonna, you probably know by now what it is. And obviously I'm a little bit biased because I love this trade. This is like my favorite trade of all time, but it's the Griffin Reinhardt trade. The thing that is so bad about this trade is they drafted McDavid, and then this was literally the next move that they made at the 2015 draft. Obviously, they had the 15th overall pick. Matt Barzal was still available. They decided to trade the pick. They traded to the Islanders for the 15th overall that ends up being Matt Barzal. Obviously, he becomes, not going to call him a franchise center, but a 70-ish point, 65 to 70-ish point center. Griffin Reinhardt goes on to play 37 games in the NHL and registers 2 points. And the weird thing with this trade, I'm going to read off the stats here. The writing was on the wall with Griffin Reinhardt. In his draft year, obviously he went 2012, he was the 4th overall pick, so a lot of hype. But by 2015, his draft year, he had 36 points in 55 games. That was 2012. 2013, he has only 29 and 59 down. Then 2014, he has 21 and 45, even worse. By then, he's a 20-year-old playing in the goddamn WHL. And then in his first pro year, he has 22 points in 59 games at the AHL level. So, like, that's the weird thing. Like, the writing, it's not like he was still this amazing franchise defenseman level prospect. He wasn't at that point. He was rapidly declining. The writing was on the wall. Oilers, Peter Chiarelli decides to give up a first-round pick with fully knowing that Matt Barzal was still on the board, who was like a top 12 consensus prospect, had one of the highest floors in the entire draft. Everybody was like, how is he still available at 15th overall? So they decided to trade that as well as the 33rd overall. Obviously, the Islanders would go on to package that in order to get Anthony Beauvillier 29th overall. But even at 33rd overall, it ended up being Michael Stevens, who had a short NHL career. But in that second round, there was guys like Sebastian Aho, Brandon Carlisle, Eric Chernak, Daniel Sprong, Rasmus Anderson, Jordan Greenway, Oliver Chillington, Jonas Siegenthaler, Rupe Hintz. Like, that was the 33rd overall pick. That was the first pick in the 32nd overall pick by the, yeah. But like, that was like a high second round pick. It was the first pick in the second round or whatever. So in looking at that, like, to go up a mid first round pick for a guy in a second, and then basically another late first rounder for a guy that didn't even play 40 games in the NHL, and it was so obvious that he wasn't panning out, I think does make it the worst move of this McDavid era, because it was supposed to be like, oh, the franchise defenseman. Imagine McDavid had, let's just say McDavid, they take Barzal and let's say they go for Brandon Carlo, who's like a good defenseman. Imagine they had that instead of Griffin Reinhardt to start out the McDavid era. You had a core of Barzell, Draisaitl, McDavid, Carlo, and then you get Puljujarvi the next fall. Like they would have been set, but instead that already set them back like an hour after taking McDavid. They were already at a disadvantage. So it is just an absolutely brutal move. So this is the final. I didn't make a graphic for this. I didn't have time, but we got the Reinhardt trade at number 1, Jack Campbell 5x5, Lucic 7x6, the Broberg pick, Kassian, Puljujarvi, Nurse, Strome trade for Spooner, Keith trade, and then Larson for Hall. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? It really is devastating to be an Oilers fan. It's tough. They've really ruined McDavid. I still think that they're going to be in a playoff battle this year. I personally would lead them getting in, but I don't think they're going to go on a Stanley Cup run with that goaltending, with how shallow of a team they are. But yeah, it's just been poor management around McDavid. We'll see if he eventually wants out. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about these picks? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Who would you put in? Who would you take off? I want to hear from you guys. I'll see you in the next one.